Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're looking at getting started in just a couple of minutes. We want to give people some time to join. So we'll be with you shortly. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today, Technology That Empowers. We are excited to have you join us as we explore how technology positively impacts healthcare organizations nationwide. To do that, we're going to paint a picture of the cohesion between XSOLIS and Interoptex and how they directly impact each other. I'm your moderator today for this webinar. My name is Mike Leff. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Interoptex. Very excited not only about our topic today, but the distinguished panelists we have with us. But before we begin, I just wanted to make our audience aware of a few housekeeping details. So everyone has joined in listen-only mode and will be through the duration. So during our Q&A session, if you have questions, please post them through your chat box and we'll get them at the end. We're planning between 30 and 40 minutes of conversation, followed by about 10 minutes of Q&A. We're going to do our very best not to go over the allotted time. We know your time is valuable. So any other questions that are not able to be answered during the webinar, we will make sure to answer them after via email. We'll also be sending a link of the event after. That way you can share it with anybody you feel needs to see this. Also, we'll also be getting a copy of the webinar slides. So with that out of the way, let me introduce our distinguished guests of honor, Seth Hobgood and Joan Butters. Seth Hobgood, CTO of Interoptex, is a 15-year veteran of healthcare IT with a focus on interoperability, DevOps, and security. He started our company to help healthcare vendors and providers with HIPAA-compliant hosting, patient data integrity, and systems integration with our fully managed cloud-based interoperability platform. The Interoptex iPaaS is built to keep integration projects on time and on budget without dedicating internal development teams to the effort. Joan Butters, CEO of XSOLIS, has over 20 years of healthcare IT leadership experience and runs the gamut between the payer, hospital, physician, and pharmacy verticals within healthcare. Joan truly brings a unique insight and expertise to her position as CEO and co-founder of XSOLIS. XSOLIS was founded with the mission of bridging healthcare silos. So how do they do that? XSOLIS uses real-time cognitive computing and predictive analytics to analyze and score disparate clinical, administrative, and financial data to support the level of care decisions, reimbursement accuracy, and denial prevention. We are super lucky to have both Seth and Joan in the room with us today. I'm excited to let them share their insights and experience, provide a few tips and best practices, and help us understand how technology leads to innovation and better outcomes, both now and down the road. Seth and Joan, thank you for being here today. So we are going to start with Joan with a couple of questions. So Joan, what gaps or challenges within the current healthcare framework prompted you to start your your company.
Well, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, audience, for your time today. So, I think one of the things that XSOLIS did from the onset of our company was we identified what I would call a fairly niche area, hospital denials, which at last count is about a $262 billion problem. So when we started XSOLIS, one of the first initiatives was how do we solve that problem, and that problem was through brute force people. But we quickly realized that there had to be a better way, and I think that the challenge there is that what I described here in terms of solving things through brute force is a pretty particular or pretty common issue, a common thread throughout healthcare. But what we at XSOLIS did was to realize that there had to be a better way through the uses of real-time analytics and more automation in solving some of the operational challenges. We were lucky when we started XSOLIS. It was really at the advent of EMRs. A lot of organizations were going through meaningful use and finding ways to better grab data and collect data, so that really did afford us the opportunity to use that information in a different way and take advantage of the richness in the data that's being captured in an EMR to solve those operational problems. So that's basically what we did. We built technology with powered by a predictive and real-time analytics platform that helps hospital staff make more objective, efficient, and data-driven decisions. And like I said, I think the big underlying theme there is the types of challenges that we solved, which once were a very people-driven process. Healthcare is now more readily recognizing that data and analytics and real-time information can be used to help solve other operational challenges that they're facing within their own organizations.
Awesome. Thank you, Joan. Seth, so same question. What gaps or challenges within the current healthcare framework prompted you to start Interoptex?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate the time to chat this morning. Also very much appreciate the attendance of our audience today. Thank you guys for being here. Just to warn everyone, I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm a little sniffly. I apologize for that. So, Mike, to answer your question, as you said, I've been in healthcare IT for about 15 years now. I've always been focused on interoperability. My first full-time healthcare IT position was helping to manage an insurance eligibility product for a company that was acquired by WebMD. So right off the bat, I was thrust into the world of interoperability within healthcare. And over the tenure of my last company, I noticed a recurring need, particularly being on the vendor side of the healthcare equation. At that company, we were a healthcare vendor specifically around outpatient therapy software. And we had to integrate with the majority of our clients. And so what we found was that we were constantly encountering situations that required us to integrate with clients in less than ideal conditions. It became pretty apparent throughout that journey that many of our clients on the provider side were really struggling to understand their integration options within their EMR or their practice management system or other ancillary clinical applications within their ecosystem. So, when I started to look around at the options for, vendors that can help with those situations, what we found were that there were really only a couple of choices out there in the integration space. One was integration consultants that charge huge upfront fees to help you build out integrations. And this might be a viable option, if you're a large healthcare company, but if you're a growing healthcare company, you probably don't have an enormous capital budget to spend on upfront integration. Especially since integration requirements are constantly shifting. So, even if you did spend a ton of money up front, you may have to then turn right around and tweak that to the tune of additional expense. The other option besides the consultants was obviously, doing it yourself, bringing in full-time developers, licensing your own on-prem or cloud-based integration engine, which, usually has its own hefty fee attached. So, if you go that route, you're looking at usually $200,000 just to kind of get started in that first year. So it occurred to me that there was a need for an integration of a service company like Interoptex that could help clients integrate their healthcare data on a subscription basis so that they weren't paying for integration work until the point at which those integrations are actually live, and they get a subscription round-the-clock service level with that service. So they have engineers that are watching all those interfaces around the clock, responding to downtime events and things like that. because once you build those integrations, you really have to put in the work to maintain them, respond quickly to disruptions and all those kinds of things. And so what we saw was that a lot of companies were struggling not only with the cost of it, but also with that maintenance aspect of integration and interoperability. So, we were happy to bring forth that service, and we've had an awesome response from the market on that. The other item there is that those expenses add up quickly. Using our service, we get that done for you more efficiently. So there's also a cost to revenue benefit as well.
Awesome. So piggybacking off of that, since you started Interoptex, where do you see current trends taking us now, or opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in healthcare tech right now. Anytime you go to a trade show or start looking around online, it's easy to get overwhelmed by just the number of disparate and yet very important technologies that are kind of becoming major forces in the market, right? So there's a lot of young telehealth companies out there helping to facilitate patient care in a remote setting, using audio-visual technology to transfer critical information between patients and physicians in different locations. So this is a really cool technology that's brand new, and it gives patients and providers a way to exchange data that might not have been part of the healthcare data set before, like videos of patient symptoms and signs that can be exchanged in real time with their provider, even though they're not in the same location. So there are some cool things happening there. Obviously there's a lot of buzz around blockchain. Quite a few companies out there trying to do interesting things with healthcare blockchain or distributed ledger technology. One of our clients actually is doing some really interesting things with bundled payments using blockchain technology. And it seems like there's a huge breakthrough there that's waiting to happen. There's a lot of discussion right now around what data belongs in a blockchain in a healthcare setting, and whether or not is that a public blockchain. If so, there are lots of challenges with HIPAA in terms of what can actually be stored in a public blockchain versus a private blockchain. So there's definitely some interesting stuff happening there, and I'm not exactly sure which way we're going, but there's definitely going to be a breakthrough at some point with blockchain technology that it enhances at least the way we make payments for our service, or something along those lines, and maybe even in the interoperability space as well. So we're kind of keeping our eye on that. Patients owning their own data is another major initiative, and one that we're pretty passionate about here at Interoptex. This is also a symptom of the interoperability problem, right? So there are a lot of companies out there trying to give patients more control over their own data, but right now there isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution to empower patients to aggregate and control their data across all the providers that they might see, regardless of EMR practice management system. So there are some things that are trying to attack that problem. There are some mobile-specific apps that patients can get now to pull down continuity of care documents and things like that. But so far there hasn't been a one-size-fits-all patient-centric application that helps the patients control their data. But there are a lot of companies working on that problem. So it's very interesting what's going on there. And, I think the other big initiative in healthcare tech today is probably around security. The breaches we saw throughout 2017 don't show any signs of slowing. Malware and cryptoware still rampant across not just our industry, but really all industries. So it's going to be more and more important for healthcare providers and healthcare IT companies to be aggressive on security posture. So doing things like implementing security frameworks like NIST, or locking in certifications like SOC or HITRUST to install confidence in their stakeholders. It's no longer enough to really be HIPAA compliant. You have to be on the ball and make sure that the more modern security controls that are available, like two-factor authentication, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, SIEM, and data leakage prevention, among others, you have to make sure all those things are really in place for any of your solutions or your data stores where you're holding patient information. So all those things are kind of driving the direction of healthcare tech in my mind at this moment.
Awesome. Very interesting. Let's go back to Joan. Joan, same question. Where do you see current trends taking us and opportunities that may have arisen since you started XSOLIS?
Sure. So there's no shortage of them, as Seth has outlined. I would add just a couple. I think digital health is certainly a big area of in terms of healthcare trends. Things gathering information through Fitbits, through mobile devices, through even non-conventional sources of information like social networks. That certainly is a growing trend, an emerging trend within healthcare, one that's caught a lot of attention, a lot of people's attention within the market. As Seth mentioned, interoperability. I think the market's been talking about interoperability for a long time. I think the challenges remain the same in terms of how do you with the lack of a universal data set, how do you solve the challenges around interoperability, and then also patient identification. There's organizations that are actually challenging companies to come up with a patient matching algorithm. So there's certainly opportunities still there within interoperability across the healthcare spectrum. I'd also argue that interoperability within the four walls of a hospital is also an area of focus for organizations. For those of you on the phone know that, and those of you that are within a hospital setting can appreciate the fact that even though you have an EMR, you still have multiple data, multiple systems feeding and gathering information. So the ability to leverage APIs that will allow the connectivity and the consolidation of that information, I think, is an area of focus for most organizations. And then the one that Seth didn't mention, but I think is a big healthcare trend, is around machine learning. So there's a lot of buzz around how do you use predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, IBM Watson type solutions to help solve clinical problems like predicting sepsis, or readmissions, or clinical issues, risk of mortality and such. I do also think that there's a huge opportunity, and that's the business that XSOLIS is in, but a huge opportunity to solve and answer operational questions through the use of machine learning as well. So like both, obviously there is no shortage of opportunities within the healthcare market, and I think that the underlying theme here is all of the things that Seth and I outlined take data, require normalized data to be able to make all those solutions successful. And so, obviously conversations and working with a partner that can help intake that data, normalize that data, use that data in a real-time environment is crucial to the validity of these types of healthcare trends being real in the market.
Absolutely. And Joan, XSOLIS is selling directly into the provider space. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the challenges that the providers are facing and what can maybe be done to address them.
Sure. So I think, and I'll talk about this operationally. We can take this path a lot of different ways, but operationally, I think hospitals, realize that that technology can solve problems that operational problems, right? I think the first challenge is choosing the right solution. So again, those of you that are on the phone that are dealing with, people, there's no shortage of people coming to you and saying, hey, I can solve this problem or solve that problem. I'm the right vendor for that opportunity. And I think the biggest challenge is trying to figure out how do you make sure you choose the right vendor and choose the vendor that is going to provide the best return on your investment. There's a lot of shiny objects out there in organizations saying they can do X, Y, and Z, but unless you have proven results, it will be a challenge for your organization. I think once you choose the right vendor, however, it's also important that, or the other biggest challenge is then how do you implement it? So Seth has mentioned early in his start of Interoptex that one of his realizations was the fact that organizations just don't have the bandwidth to be able to solve for the challenges that they have. And I can't tell you in my experience that seems to be a reoccurring theme too. The IT organizations are stretched. Their list of priorities is 150 priorities deep. That's not a priority. That's just 150 list of things that they need to do. So finding an organization that can implement their solutions without having to tax those internal IT resources is important. And at XSOLIS, one of the things that has made us successful is our ability to do a lot of the heavy lifting for our hospital clients. We leverage a lot of the existing outbound interfaces that allow us to do the real-time cognitive computing and the real-time analytics. Crucial to that ability to leverage those existing interfaces is the partnership that we have with Interoptex. the iPath solution to take that data in, normalize that data, and be able to provide that front-end solution to our clients. So I think, just to summarize, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunities for hospitals to better leverage analytics and technology. The challenge is, how do you fit that into your current priority list and your current IT bandwidth, and the ability to find partners that are going to allow you to do that, to take advantage of those solutions, but take advantage of it in a way that doesn't tax your internal resources is important.
Sure, that is some good insight. And Seth, what about you? Tell us a little bit about the challenges that the providers are facing from Interoptex perspective, and what can be done to address those.
Sure. As Joan alluded to, the interoperability problem, and that's the problem, obviously, that we're trying to solve to the extent that we can here at Interoptex, and that's the problem we run into most often. So you have a number of EMRs and practice management systems and document management systems and scheduling systems, et cetera, out there. They all may or may not use the same standards. So, HL7 version 2 was very prolific throughout healthcare up until about 2-3 years ago. 80% of the EMRs out there were doing HL7 version 2, but now there's kind of a through Meaningful Use 2 and the incentives it brought forth in respect to sending continuity of care documents. Now you have continuity of care documents in the mix, in addition to proprietary data sets. HL7 FHIR standard is kind of beginning to catch on. So you have some systems that are latching on to one out of many formats, and then obviously those formats have to be changed to be delivered to the right endpoint. And so we still see a lot of providers struggling with that, a lot of growing companies struggling with that challenge. And so that's the main challenge we're trying to attack, is that interoperability and disparity of data problem. The other issue we see is there is a quality of data issue in some cases with some providers, especially providers that are acquisition heavy, so they're acquiring additional hospitals or additional enterprises that own their own hospitals, and so they end up with several different pools of patient data, right? That's not necessarily being synchronized in a way that tells those companies what their real number of covered lives looks like and what their real source of truth is for their patient population. And so we're doing our part to combat that problem with our EMPI product. And so what that product does is we can integrate any system to that product, whether it's direct database or it's HL7 or it's FHIR or it's APIs. It's agnostic to the endpoint that we use, but what we do is we take in that patient data from all these different systems, and so we apply what we call the golden record logic to all of that aggregated data. So you may have a John Doe with a different name in 3 systems. We can actually determine which name he should be assigned in his true golden record based on logic we work with our clients to develop. So very excited to be helping our clients attack that problem. And some interesting feedback about the EMPI. We just did our first go-live effort on that EMPI product, and right out of the gate, our partner, who has about 40,000 covered lives, found that they had duplicated records for 500 patients. So day one, we were able to provide quite a bit of value because they realized almost immediately that they had literally more than 1% of their patient population duplicated across at least 2 different systems. So those are the challenges that we're seeing today and the ones we're trying to help solve.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. Okay, so last question. Can you talk a little bit about prioritizing data in healthcare, the why, when, what, who, and how leaders should be looking to harness its potential? What are some of the challenges when assimilating and trying to make health data actionable, Joan?
Sure. So like I said earlier in the conversation, the advent of EMRs is both a curse and a blessing. So we're as a market collecting vast amount of longitudinal data that is, but the challenge there is how do you get that data in a usable state? How do you identify the most relevant data points, and then how do you keep it that way? So and this, from my own personal perspective, when you're providing a solution that leverages real-time predictive analytics, that certainly complicates the challenge. I mean, one change in the way that a lab comes through, or a vital comes through, or a medication might impact the effectiveness of those analytics. So it's really important that you have a solution in place that allows you to identify any changes in that the data that's coming through and being able to monitor that so that you make sure that you have the ability to make corrections in the analytics that you're providing to organizations. And again, I think all that matters, and what that all boils down to is making sure that you have the right process in place on the front end. So data normalization is a heavy lift for most organizations. We at XSOLIS live that challenge every day with the partnership that we have with Interoptex in terms of understanding, if there's a change in the file format that's coming across, is there a dip in the volume of data that's coming across, because all that has an impact not only on obviously the analytics that we provide and produce, but also how our clients use that analytics as well. And so again, I think a lot of people haven't attempted to manage data real time, and it's all because of the above, right? The intake process, the normalization process, the making sure that the data the uptime is there, that you've identified any issues coming across, and so how it becomes actionable is the ability to manage that process from the beginning to the end.
Great, awesome. So let's switch gears now. Now that we have a better framework for the challenges healthcare leaders experience, let's talk a little bit about how they're being solved. So, Joan, what is cognitive computing, and how is it being applied within the hospital setting? Also, how did you even think to apply this type of technology to operations and finance?
Sure. So cognitive computing is just an elaborate way of saying that we apply predictive analytics and machine learning to automate and mimic what a hospital staff does today manually. So as I mentioned, when I first started XSOLIS, our main business model was to address the denial problem that hospitals were having, and that was, we were hoping, our main approach was to do that manually. Well, again, through the use of data, we quickly understood that there's a better way to do that, and that's through the cognitive computing. So let me strip away what that really means. And so think about when a physician's going in to treat a patient, one of the first things that they do is try to understand the relative health of a patient. So they go into the EMR and they look at multiple data points. How old is the person? How old is the patient? Are they on any high-cost or high-risk medications? What is are they relatively healthy in terms of their weight, height, and different variables? Well, that's all done through the knowledge that clinician has. And so what we've done, though, is created to solve for that particular question that the clinician is asking, is created a wellness score. And so that's the thought behind cognitive computing, is take what a person does manually and cognitively and use technology to answer that same question. We have similar algorithms that do that same sort of thing, that would suggest that a patient's ready for discharge, what level of care is required, is the care medically necessary, again, all of which a clinician does intuitively. But today, through the ability for us to collect and analyze and predict on that data, we can take that clinical knowledge, and all that can be done through analytics. Now, that's not necessarily to say, although that our algorithms and predictive models are highly accurate, that we completely replace the mind of a healthcare provider, certainly not. But I do think that the use of analytics and cognitive computing helps to make those decisions better, because now they're data-driven and they're supported by the analytics and the information that is consolidated and presented to them.
Awesome. Thank you. Seth, there's been a lot of talk and media attention focused on interoperability. Can you speak a little more to the urgency and heightened need for this type of patient-centered, collaborative approach to health?
Yeah, so personally, I believe that other than access to healthcare and the cost of healthcare, interoperability is really the single greatest challenge we have in the healthcare today in the U.S. So there are too many formats of data. Connectivity to exchange that data is complicated. There's no real open API standard for healthcare. You're kind of hearing that buzzword being thrown around a little bit now. Interoperability conversations about the open API. And although there are some APIs attached to EMRs that are leveraging, the FHIR standard from HL7, for instance, to make them more open. There still isn't any kind of standard in terms of the way that those APIs are accessed or the process by which they might be accessed. So you're still seeing situations where some companies are claiming that they have an open API, but they're charging exorbitant fees to access that API to their clients, which results in kind of control of that patient data that won't flow in the way it really needs to enhance the care for those patients. So that's where we need to move to is kind of a more open API standard that's not gated behind proprietary schemas or exorbitant fees or revenue sharing or that kind of thing. We also approach the interoperability problem from both an optimistic, we'd like to see everyone using FHIR APIs kind of approach, and also real world, we're still 10 years off from that happening unless there's some kind of a huge government incentive to do so. So we're tackling all comers. We understand that some systems are going to rely on older file-based formats. Some systems are going to have the newer APIs that are more flexible and more responsive. Our goal is to have a platform agnostic application within our iPaaS that processes these data sets regardless of their origin or their schema or whatever the case may be, so that we're enhancing patient care for our clients and empowering them to build their products and sell their products and not focus on the headaches of integration and interoperability.
Awesome. Now, Joan, tell us a little bit about how you initially partnered with Interoptex and how has that process changed over time?
Sure. So, when we first started out, Interoptex provided a very important need to us. We had a vision and an idea, but didn't have all the pieces and parts that we needed to be able to actually implement. And so while we were first getting started, Interoptex afforded us the expertise that we needed to leverage to implement our first clients. And for any of those of you on the phone that have ever started a business, getting it right with your first client is very important. And thankfully and luckily, Interoptex helped us to do that through the expertise that they had in terms of not only connecting to real-time connecting to a hospital's EMR, but also, like I said during the course of this conversation, the normalization of that data and the processing of that data. So we were very fortunate to have started with Interoptex in our early stages. I think to Seth's point earlier about why people choose to use a partner in that is the cost effectiveness of that from our perspective. So we knew that to build that team internally, not just from a cost perspective, but an expertise perspective, would have been a much heavier lift for us than what the Interoptex team and the solution that they have had for us. So, it's the classic build versus buy, and we're lucky that we bought it in a way that has become quite a partnership through the years. So just from a growth perspective, I think it's important to kind of lay this out. So from that first client back in 2013, Interoptex has helped us to connect to over 30 different healthcare enterprises. They maintain and monitor and process 100 and some odd live interfaces, and I think putting it into perspective in terms of the volumes of data that is processed through the Interoptex solution, they process about 1.5 million records transactions a day. So obviously that's a pretty significant volume that we depend on Interoptex team to maintain and to monitor and to process for us, and it's a great relationship. I think there's two telling things about the relationship that we have and the ability of Interoptex to provide those solutions to us. One is that my internal development staff sees Interoptex as an extension of their own of us. So, it's not as if it's a vendor that's providing those services. It's certainly a consultative relationship that we have with Interoptex, and as healthcare changes, it's important to know that Interoptex knows kind of the latest and greatest ways to solve for different problems that we face within as we get more complex in the implementation. And the other the other attribute, and probably the most important to me as the CEO, is as the CEO, there's many things that I have to keep my finger on the pulse of, from operational challenges to client challenges to making sure that we're providing the best service. My connectivity and uptime and real-time processing of information is one that I don't worry about because of the relationship that I have with Interoptex. So it is a true partnership, and that the expertise that they bring, the consultative approach that they bring to my company, and the ability to know that that is maintained and not a problem that I have to worry about is why Interoptex has been such a great partner.
Awesome. Thank you, Joan. It's good to hear that. Seth, what's your advice for healthcare providers and vendors working towards interoperability? Is there a right or wrong way to work towards integrating their systems?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is, like many answers, is really it depends. For growing providers and growing healthcare IT companies, I think you really want to be wary about just trying to do it all yourself. It's really easy to end up with kind of a Frankenstein-like product where you're building out direct API integrations into your application, into your source code, and then every time the vendor that you're talking to with those APIs makes a change, you're stuck updating your source code. And that doesn't account for non-API related deliveries of data like flat files, HL7 version 2, all those kinds of things. So I think just making the right decision in terms of your size, are you big enough, and does it make sense in terms of expertise for you to kind of grow your own integration department internally, or are you a growing company that needs to integrate quickly, needs fast access to expertise, and doesn't want to have to get in the weeds every time there's an interoperability problem? If the latter is true, then you definitely want to look to someone like Interoptex to kind of help you manage that piece, so you're not putting additional pressure on your developers to juggle not only the features of your application, but also the connectivity and the endpoints and the integrity of your data and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, what I tell our partners today is that it's best for them to create a FHIR API that we will leverage. So Interoptex takes in data and sends out data in all different formats, but our clients, we typically recommend they develop a standardized inbound and outbound to Interoptex. That way we can always take in the data regardless of format, shape it, and deliver it in the way it needs to be delivered. And if they develop to the FHIR API standard, then there will come a point at which we reach that pie in the sky reality of every healthcare application using that type of connectivity, and so the need for a company like Interoptex kind of goes away at that point. So we understand that at some point that will make our offering less relevant as it stands at this moment, but again, that's kind of what's needed to make healthcare move forward, and so we're on board with that, and we'll have other solutions at that time that'll be meaningful when we get there. So
great, thank you, Seth. So it's looking like we're getting to the question and answer time. Let me see if we have any questions from anyone. Okay. So this one is for Joan. Beyond operations, where do you see the most immediate need for cognitive computing in healthcare?
So I think, like I said, there's really, when you think about you're either solving operational challenges or trying to answer clinical questions, and I think that trying to answer clinical questions is an area of opportunity for the application of cognitive computing and machine learning. Again, at the end of the day, when a clinician's looking at a multiple, a 30-page medical record to determine what is going on with that patient, the more that you can take that information, extract it, pull out the more relevant pieces of information is important, and from an efficiency perspective, and then from an objectivity perspective. Again, keeping in mind that cognitive computing and machine learning will never take the place of a clinician, but certainly allows the clinician to make better decisions and identify the pieces of information that are most relevant to treating that patient. So certainly there's an opportunity in healthcare from a clinical perspective, from an operational perspective as well. And again, if you think about the volumes of patients that a clinician sees on a regular basis, the more that you can you can provide efficient ways for them to get to that information, the better care and the more efficient that staff will be.
Great, very insightful. And we have one for Seth from Michelle. Seth, does Interoptex have an API that we can hit? I'm assuming we is the vendor.
Yes, so we do. Our platform goes both ways. So we have some clients who want to consume our API. So in other words, they want to get data from our API. They want to get visits. They want to get appointments, demographics, et cetera, using a RESTful GET call. We do offer that if that's the approach they want to take. We also consume the APIs of our clients. So we have some clients that say, look, we need to know all of the latest appointments from this Athena installation, and we need you to post them to this RESTful service using this specific signature that we've developed. In either case, we're flexible and we meet that need. So one of the first things we do when we do our discovery with a client is understand exactly what their capabilities are, what their preferences are in terms of how they would like the logistics of the data transfer work. Do they want to consume an API? Do they want a direct database connection? All of those options are on the table when we work with our clients.
Awesome. Very nice. Just see if we have any other questions. And it looks like we do not. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending this webinar. We hope you found it educational, whether you're considering emerging technologies to supplement your organization or informative for those who are just interested in learning about this potential. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be a link sent out to the attendees here with the recording. And we would love to hear from you if you're interested in learning more from Seth or Joan. You can feel free to reach out to me, or you can visit interoptex.com or XSOLIS.com. So Seth, Joan, thank you very much. Always a pleasure, and I'm glad we had this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.